Woman gets too close to take photo of bear. Gets charged by the animal. Trouble afoot. He hurried through a tangle of bushes to a clearing where several tourists had parked their cars. There was trouble afoot because most of them fled and locked themselves in their vehicles. The ranger brought his rifle with him, hoping he wouldn't use it because the region was grizzly bear territory. He sped past the cars but stopped at what he saw. Being a park ranger. When Brody decided to work as a park ranger, he only wanted to fulfill his childhood dream. He'd worked hard through school, finally getting a chance to train as a ranger. Before he knew it, he was patrolling the beaten paths of Yellowstone National Park, ensuring that everything was in order. But what would happen that day would show him that the wild was a place to be respected. Brody McCormick. Brody McCormick was your average 29-year-old ranger from Wyoming, United States, a lover of the outdoors and everything it brought. He enjoyed spending time in the wild where nature and peace intertwined. The only child to a botanist mom and a zoologist dad, it came as no shock that Brody would forge a life steeped in biology. All his life he'd wanted to be a ranger so he could protect wildlife. But that day he'd find himself stopping instead of rushing to help. Growing up. Brody grew up with the great stories surrounding the wild Yellowstone National Park. His dad, who centered his studies on the park's magnificent animals, always regaled him with these tales, ensuring that Brody's childhood was magical. But although these stories were always captivating, his dad never failed to inject caution within them. One, in particular, stayed with Brody through the years, warnings surrounding grizzly bears. The top of the food chain. Among the 3 species of bears native to North America, grizzlies rank second in terms of viciousness, nearly surpassing the white-coated polar bear. Grizzlies not only weigh between 700 to 1,700 pounds, but can be as tall as 5 feet when standing on their hind legs. An apex predator in most ecological systems, they're more than capable of climbing trees, swimming through most water bodies, and outrunning any human fleeing on their feet. Safe to say that antagonizing such terrifying spawns of nature should be the last thing on anybody's mind. A cautionary tale. Well, the woman in this story must have failed to get the memo regarding grizzly bears because she found out the hard way that these animals might look snugly on the outside but are anything but. For many, Brody included, witnessing what the bear did to the woman was more than a cautionary tale that would doubtlessly be a lesson for many generations. It happens. The day the incident took place started like many others around the park. After a quick visit to the park office to run through the day's logistics, Brody hurried into the wild to ensure tourists enjoyed their time while respecting the park's wildlife. He took his regular route through the park, covering his assigned areas. He was about to return to the office for a quick rest when he heard the commotion. Pinpointing the trouble. The sound was an amalgamation of tourists screaming and animal growls. Fearing the worst, Brody hurried to the source of the commotion, hoping everything was all right. The park had strict rules when it came to tourists viewing the animals. For one, they weren't allowed to be more than 100 yards from dangerous species such as bears. Grizzly bear territory. Although most tourists adhered to the set rules, a few wholly neglected them. You can already guess which category the woman falls into. Brody dashed through many bushes to a clearing where several tourists had parked their cars. Most of them were running away and locking themselves in their vehicles, which could only mean one thing. Trouble was afoot. A dangerous place. In the many months that Brody had been part of Yellowstone, he'd encountered several other visitors who didn't respect the park and got taught a lesson. While some usually came out of their ordeals alive, some didn't. Since the area was a grizzly bear territory, Brody carried his rifle, hoping he'd not have to use it. He dashed past the cars, but what he saw made him stop. The sound. Brody wasn't even close to the scene when he heard a deep roar. His heart paused as his mind registered the sound. It was a grizzly bear. But as he ran towards the commotion, hoping none of the tourists were getting mauled by the animal, he saw something that made him wish he'd been off duty that day. The beast. Brody's sight landed on the grizzly, a towering beast brimming with rage, but to make everything worse, there were two smaller bears behind it. He bit back a curse. This was a mama bear, and if there was anything worse than a grizzly bear, it was one with cubs. He stopped for a second before his sight landed on the woman. Everybody was locked in their cars by now, except for the woman, who was standing with her phone in her hand. From the look of things, she was taking photos of the bear, which was not thrilled with her presence. The bear charged at her, and only when it was a few feet away did she turn to sprint. Brody knew he had to get to the woman. Mama bears. Mama bears are usually more aggressive than other bears because they seek to protect their young. In many cases, they'll turn anything in their way into a pile of flesh ribbons to ensure their cub's safety. Brody let go of his rifle and pulled out his bear spray can as he dashed to the woman. He was lucky the vehicles hid him from the bear's sight, or the situation might have ended differently. What the bear did next made him stop in his tracks. Please spread the smiles by sharing these adorable best friends with your best friends.